Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Okay, so here's something cool that's, well, I'll talk about it at the end of this video. The DCeased story, this was like DC's first real shot at a zombie story that didn't involve the Green Lanterns, right? We got Blackest Night, which was essentially a zombie story, but Blackest Night served the purpose of just basically allowing DC to create a soft reboot, right? To basically resurrect everybody who was dead and then keep the ones who mattered the most, right? That was really all it was. Blackest Night, Brightest Day, that's how those two things ran in tandem. This isn't like a Blackest Night story, right? It was just a straight up zombie story. That's what DCeased was. But the cool thing is DC Comics really seems to have just picked up on how much people loved this. And the good thing is we've had all these little mini series, but we also have this, right? This is Hope at World's End. Hope at World's End is like a companion series, right? So this gives us essentially what was going on between the pages or between the issues of the main DC story, right? So you get DCeased #1, and then this fits in there somewhere. You know, you get DCeased #2, this fits in as well, all the way up until the end. And then from what I understand, we'll get more Hope at World's End stories, and those will like kind of fit into the rest of all that stuff, right? Showing us more about what was going on. Because the reality is that as cool as DCeased was, it felt light on content, right? I mean, you guys remember, like DCeased came out and it's like, God, there's so many unanswered questions here. Like I need more. And it was a really smart play by DC to play it out that way, right? But what this does here is this initially picks up with Jimmy Olsen. And Jimmy Olsen's kind of going through here and talking about how he never wanted to be a war photographer, right? But like here they are in that moment, he's now a war photographer and he wanted to keep memories, right? He wanted to keep pictures of the various superheroes and their various escapades, but more so than that, just the small moments. And this is cool. This is why Tom Taylor is such an amazing writer, right? Let's deviate away from this for a second. Let's talk about Injustice, right? When Tom Taylor wrote Injustice, he knocked it out of the park, right? That story was amazing because it gave us all the characters that we know and love from DC and some of whom we didn't even know about before, and then brought them to us and then took us on like this emotional roller coaster, right? With like all these twists and turns and these insane moments, like learning Harley Quinn had a daughter and she had to give her daughter up, just different things like that, right? Like there were just these amazing moments that took place in that story. And this is much the same way, right? The idea of Jimmy Olsen going through and not really hanging up pictures of the conflict, but just hanging up pictures of like Wonder Woman and Martian Manhunter, both of them eating like, you know, snacks, and like Blue Beetle doing his thing, and like Damian Wayne, Jonathan Kent, you know, like these small little moments here and there are awesome because this is what's really to be remembered, right? The superheroes out there, you know, sure they had escapades and they fought villains, bad guys, so on and so forth, but what matters the most to Jimmy Olsen are like the small little moments. And so what we end up doing is that where that little segment took place in the present day, this jumps back to about 2 weeks beforehand at the Daily Planet. And it picks up, of course, with, you know, Jimmy Olsen having gotten pictures of Superman beating the crap out of Doomsday at some point in time, of course, before the events of DCeased kicked off. And the result is that where Perry White is kind of celebrating the fact that Jimmy Olsen could get those shots, they're shots that are, you know, going to make the headlines. Those are the kind of shots to get people Pulitzer Prizes, different things like that. The result is that in the middle of this, suddenly we get that ding, and then we essentially have the anti-life virus that just suddenly spreads, right? So this happens the moment that basically Cyborg ends up inadvertently spreading the virus across the internet. And so suddenly everybody starts transforming, and it happens in instants, right? And that's kind of the crazy thing is we sort of knew how it took place, right? I mean, we got those little moments there, but it's kind of cool to see this from the perspective of Jimmy Olsen. Like the world is falling apart around him and he's just like taking pictures, right? Because that's what he does. It's the only thing he knows how to do. But people are like within seconds, people are just like rematerializing into just these monsters losing their minds. And so he grabs the individuals who have not been exposed yet and then yanks them away and basically puts them into the broadcast room. Now, this is why Jimmy Olsen snapped this picture, and it's why it's a genius shot. Jimmy Olsen took a picture of them, of all these people out there looking at the, you know, their phones and so on and so forth. Now, the important thing about this is the anti-life virus spreads through digital information, right? It spreads through like phones and different things like that. From what we gather, it does not spread through like a picture of that. And that kind of makes sense. Yes, pictures store digital, they store, you know, information, but only in relation to the image that was shot, right? Like if you go and you take a picture, it does not like physically store any information there. So like if you take a picture of a computer, you're not going to store any information from the computer on the picture, right? That's not how that works. And so it's cool to kind of see that little bit of a twist there, to see that little bit of involvement. But more so than that, it gives Jimmy Olsen the realization of how it's all kicking off. That people were looking at their phones, that they were looking at their computers, they were looking at tablets, all those different things. It's spreading through personal devices. And so where Jimmy Olsen's like phones, like immediately, you know, Kat goes to grab her phone. I think that's Kat. She goes to grab her phone and Jimmy Olsen says, no phones, and throws it out the window, right? Like no phones, everybody stay off their personal devices. That's one of the cool things about Jimmy Olsen is he's smart, right? He's not just a guy who takes pictures and he's really good at it and he probably has a cool Instagram account. He's really smart. And so with that, you know, with him picking up on that quite, you know, very fast, from there it's kind of like, okay, the world's devolving into chaos all around them. People are trying to get in through the broadcast room door. They basically barricade the door as best they can. And then suddenly there's quiet. And when Jimmy Olsen cracks the door open, Superman's there. So we know this is the moment when Superman shows up to the Daily Planet and is basically there alongside like Green Lantern and all those characters and trying to rescue people. And it's cool because, you know, where Jimmy Olsen says, I didn't really use my communicator, right? I didn't use my signal watch because I felt like there were other people who were needed, which is true. Superman ultimately, of course, ended up rescuing Jimmy and just says, hey, I'll be back as soon as I can. And what we get is this kind of play-by-play in a relatively quick amount of time while they were there inside the Daily Planet. The idea that like Batman fell, Nightwing, like Hal Jordan, all those guys basically ended up falling and ended up dying, right? That was one of the biggest shocks of the first issue. But by the time the first issue ends, it's the end of Bruce Wayne. And like it really kind of threw us off guard because historically speaking in DC, Bruce Wayne's the MacGuffin, right? He's the means by which the story ends, right? Like, okay, nobody else can figure out what's going on. You know, Bruce Wayne can do it because the plot calls for it, right? That's kind of how that whole thing worked. And so with him being out of the picture right off the bat, it's like, okay, well, what hope do they have? Which I really think speaks volumes more about the nature of Batman than anything else, right? Batman dies, well then everybody's gonna die because how else are they gonna live? You know, it was kind of a crazy little thing there. But of course, as we know, we ended up having Superman, the other members of the Justice League who showed up, basically ended up, or at least the remainders of the Justice League, ended up protecting everybody in the Daily Planet when Captain Atom exploded, right? When he detonated, ended up wiping out 3 different cities, including Metropolis, you know, just different things like that. But Jimmy Olsen is watching all of this go on. And that's what makes this so cool, is because when we were reading it, we were looking at it from the perspective of just us as a person, right? But we saw Superman, we saw him dealing with Lois Lane, the idea that like so much of their city had been lost, or the entire city had been lost, so many of their friends had been killed, different things like that. But we saw it from the, you know, through the eyes of Superman or through the eyes of Lois Lane or something like that. Seeing it through the eyes of Jimmy Olsen is almost like just being there in the moment and watching it happen. And that's what's so cool, is because he's just kind of like, just because a guy is, you know, just because bullets bounce off a guy does not mean that like he's invulnerable, right? This guy is, you know, there's different types of vulnerability emotionally, mentally, things like that. And while Superman's not broken, he's certainly hurting. But what he understands is that he could dwell and he could, you know, mourn the dead and there'll be time to do that. In the moment right now, it's focusing on the living. It's doing what needs to be done. And that's where he tasks, you know, Dinah Lance, you know, the new Green Lantern. That's where he tasks her with these things. But again, it's kind of a crazy moment because again, like Superman basically takes off, you know, and that's when we you know, when Jimmy Olsen gets the shot of Superman leaving. So of course, you know, this is before Superman ends up becoming infected. You know, we kind of get this thing where Jimmy Olsen is just kind of back, basically taking pictures, developing these shots and then hanging them up so that all these heroes, the fallen heroes, are remembered, right? Now, Poison Ivy and Harley Quinn, they're viewed as having already been dead. We know that's not the case, so we know Jimmy Olsen doesn't have all the facts, and that's important because we see Krypto there, and I would love to believe that Krypto's not dead, right? I would love to believe he's not one of the anti-life zombies. I would love to believe that he's still alive because nobody ever wants to see the dog die. But nonetheless, the cool thing about all this and the big revelation that we get here is that what DC is doing with regards to the DCeased event is they're launching, or at least with the DC story, they're launching an event called the Anti-Life War, where basically all the various heroes who were left, heroes, villains, whoever, individuals who have power, they're all basically going to be there to like fight off the anti-life monsters, more or less. This is awesome because when you keep in mind everything that's happened, Superman is still out there. The last we saw, he flew into the sun, right? That was basically it. The various other superheroes ended up traveling to Oa, to the home of the Green Lanterns, right? This is also taking into account, or at least we have to consider, if this is relatively close to the rest of the DC mythos, you've got all the other Lantern Corps, right? So this could be like very similar to Injustice in a lot of different ways, right? But it could just be this massive event that DC's doing. It's cool, right? Like it's amazing. And it's one of the best ideas that DC's had in a long time. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.